Pelosi keeping her friends close and her potential enemies a bit closer tonight, meeting face-to-face on the Hill with the woman emerging as the most talked-about potential contender to take her on in the race for the Speaker's gavel. As some Democrats are declaring it's time for not just women, but a woman of color to get a prominent spot in the congressional leadership.
I'm hearing it from lobbyists, from labor, from tons and tons of people. And so there's a great deal of hope and excitement about the fact that there could be new leadership.
New leadership maybe. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Henry, in for Martha McCallum. If Congresswoman Marcia Fudge does run, it would further complicate Pelosi's already shaky quest for the gavel. While several members of the crucial Congressional Black Caucus have expressed their support early on for Pelosi, some now say they're, quote-unquote, waiting to see what happens in the wake of Fudge's potential run. This, as a growing list of Democrats refused to fall in line, as the week began with newcomers like New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez staging a sit-in outside the former Speaker's office. It's ending with freshmen and veteran lawmakers alike hitting the airwaves to voice their concerns about Pelosi being the face and voice of her party.
One of the things that I talked about frequently on the campaign trail was the need to have new voices in Congress, the need to turn a new page.
If we answer that call for new leadership by reinstalling the same status quo establishment leadership that we've had in this party since 2006, then we're letting down the American people.
Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live on Capitol Hill again with where Pelosi stands tonight. Good evening, Mike.
Ed, good evening to you. As Ohio Congresswoman Marcia Fudge considers whether to run for Speaker of the House, she made this comparison between House Democrats and the National Football League's lowly Cleveland Browns.
The Browns have the same team today that they had 3 weeks ago. We changed coaches, and they started to win. Same people. Sometimes you just need a different voice. Sometimes you just need a different kind of a vision. But I want to be clear that I have not said anything negative about Nancy because I think she's a very, very good leader.
Fudge's flirtation with running has put prominent African-American House Democrats in an awkward spot. Karen Bass, Hakeem Jeffries, Sheila Jackson Lee, and civil rights icon John Lewis say they're still behind Pelosi, but the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus sounds intrigued about the possibility of Fudge for Speaker.
I'm not anti-Pelosi. Not at all. I consider the Speaker to be a very talented Speaker, a remarkable Speaker. I consider her to be a friend, but I'm closer to Marcia. So if Marcia ran out, that's where I would be.
Pelosi says she intends to win the speakership with Democratic votes and suggests she has overwhelming support, but she appears to have a math problem with at least 17 Democrats saying they will not support her. Pelosi and Fudge met for 45 minutes today, with Pelosi saying, quote, "We had a candid and respectful conversation." After that, Fudge said she was heading back to Ohio to consider whether she will run.
You said you decide after Thanksgiving. How soon should we expect to hear from you on your decision?
After Thanksgiving.
Well, that could be months after, weeks after.
No. It wouldn't be. I mean, literally after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
If Fudge decides to run, time is precious. After all, House Democrats are expected to vote for the next speaker by secret ballot in just 12 days. Ed?
All right, have a good weekend, Fal. Meanwhile,
thank you.
Lisa Booth and Richard Fowler, both are Fox News contributors. They are here tonight. Good evening, both of you.
Hey, Ed.
Good to see you, Ed.
Richard, I'm struck by the comparison to the Cleveland Browns. For people who don't follow the NFL, I'm not sure if you do. Let me see, I checked. Going back to 2016, they've won only 4 games. Is that the best analogy for Democrats tonight?
I'm not sure if that's the best analogy, but here's what we do know. I mean, I think here's the thing: either whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Marcia Fudge, they'd both be incredible speakers. But if Nancy Pelosi is going to win this, I think she's going to have to make a couple of changes. And she said in an interview recently on another network that one thing her father taught her, the former mayor of Baltimore, was you got to know how to count, and she knows how to count. Here are some of the changes that she's going to have to make. 1, I think she's going to have to come up with a succession plan. 2, I think she's going to have to do what the Republican caucus did and create term limits for chairmanships. 3, she's going to have to diversify her leadership team. Right now, a lot of folks on her leadership team probably qualify for Medicaid, or Medicare, excuse me.
Medicare, yeah.
And that's going to have to change. And I think if she makes those changes, I think she could probably see the Speaker's mantle once again, making her the first female Speaker and the first female to regain the gavel.
All right, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Lisa, let's start with the diversity question, because conservatives have long criticized Pelosi and other Democratic leaders for playing what they call identity politics. And I wonder, when a Democrat like Seth Moulton says, quote, "We need more women, including women of color, in congressional leadership," is that game of identity politics sort of boomeranging on the Democratic leadership now?
Potentially, and that's going to be Nancy Pelosi having to deal with it. But if this wrangling that she's already trying to do to get the Speaker's gavel is any indication of what this next Congress is going to look like, she's in a lot of trouble. Because one thing that is really interesting, remember what we've seen with the House Freedom Caucus and the difficulty of Speaker Ryan trying to keep Republicans in line. Nancy Pelosi is going to have the same problem with the Progressive Caucus, and estimates show that they're going to have around 90 members this next Congress. That is a very big voting bloc, and for Nancy Pelosi to try to exert power, particularly with a Republican-controlled Senate and Donald Trump in the White House as a Republican, she's going to need to keep her caucus in line, and that's going to be really difficult for her next Congress. So that is what I'm interested in watching next Congress. I think she's going to have a really difficult time on her hands.
Richard, you can weigh in on that, but I want to follow up. You mentioned the word diversity, and I'm interested. You said that they need to diversify the leadership. As you know, there's already an African-American man in the Democratic leadership, Jim Clyburn, a long-time Democratic lawmaker, and he seems upset, by the way, that there's been this whisper campaign among Democrats, not Republicans, to push him out. Here's what he said in the last couple of days, quote, "Someone came to me over the weekend and told me that they heard when I was whip before, as in majority whip, when the Democrats were in charge, I was a figurehead. The suggestion that as the only black member of the leadership team, he was a token and not an effective leader was tantamount to, quote, what Clyburn says were the little dog whistles that have been floating around this side for a long time." What in the world is happening if Democrats, according to Jim Clyburn, are using racist dog whistles to suggest he's been a figurehead?
I can't speak to that. I was talking about more so diversity in age, right? I think we have a caucus that is very young. You have the youngest members in Congress now, just on the Democratic side, whether it's Lauren Underwood from Illinois, who's the youngest African American in the caucus, to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's the youngest person in Congress, period. So I think we need to diversify in age. We also need to diversify in how the caucus looks. We have the first Native American woman elected to Congress. We have the first lesbian Native American elected to Congress.
I appreciate all that, Richard.
Deserve their voice and their say in the caucus. And I think to make that a reality, the caucus has to look more like both caucuses and both leadership structures, both the Democrat and the Republican structure, have to look more like the American people. So if you look at the census, that would be, what, 13 or 14% African American, 13 or 14% Latino, just representing how the American people look.
Okay, I want to get Lisa back in, but you didn't answer my question directly. You already have an African American leader in the Democratic leadership. Would you at least admit it's not a good look for the Democratic Party that even Jim Clyburn is claiming that people are trying to push him out?
Well, like I said, I think Nancy Pelosi has a larger problem when it comes to diversifying her caucus leadership overall. I think Clyburn's been a very effective leader, and I think his results speaks for themselves. So if people are trying to push him out and run a whisper campaign, they're making a huge mistake, because Jim Clyburn's one of the most effective legislators, and I would argue, in American history. But beyond, to answer Lisa's point about having trouble with our caucus, we have actually learned from the Republicans in that somebody from the Progressive Caucus is running to be in the leadership, and in all likelihood, points to the fact that they will win.
Doesn't sound like you guys are together, though.
Both MoveOn.org and Indivisibles have already endorsed Nancy
Richard,
Pelosi.
It certainly doesn't sound like you guys are together, and I think one thing that's been really interesting to watch on the left is the fact that Democrats, or at least the establishment, have always done a really good job of keeping their progressive wing of the party under wraps and controlling it. And I think that they've, ever since Hillary Clinton lost, who's obviously an establishment figure, and also the appearance that the DNC was in the tank for Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders, now you've got a bunch of progressives that are exerting power. You had a lot of increase of progressives running in primaries, and Democrats had a difficult time keeping those primaries under wraps. So I actually think you've got a big problem on your hands on the left of keeping progressives under control. And I think it's going to be tough for Nancy Pelosi, if she does get the Speaker's gavel, to try to keep them in line.
Go ahead, Richard.
So have fun with that.
But when it comes to here's the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. When it comes to the issues, Democrats fundamentally agree. We believe that all Americans who have pre-existing conditions should be covered.
You don't agree on who's going to be Speaker
we
right now, it seems.
We agree that we should invest in public education. We agree that prescription drugs should be affordable for everybody.
Single payer?
That's what we're going to Congress to do.
Okay, let Lisa jump in now. Lisa, they can push all those bills, whether it's single-payer health care or whatever, but the Republicans, as you know, Lisa, have an increased majority in the Senate. So the bills they passed, they've still got to get a consensus, don't they?
Right, and those things aren't going to happen, at least looking at things, or at least what progressives want, thing like single payer. That's not going to happen with a Republican-controlled Senate and President Trump in the White House. Republicans have more power than Democrats do at this time. The way that Democrats are going to try to exert power or use their leverage is primarily going to be around spending bills. That's when they're going to be able to try to exercise their power, looking at debt ceiling increases, things of that nature. That's when you're going to see Nancy Pelosi really needing to keep her House in line to try to get concessions from
Just
Republicans.
one point to remember is in this past election, 7 million more Americans voted for Democrats than Republicans. And I think Republicans to be very careful.
And you guys haven't controlled the House since
wait a minute. Let me just make my point.
Richard. And we won that Senate in 2014. The White House in 2016, my friend.
Than Republicans. And if you guys want to retain the House and regain suburban Republicans,
congratulations on finally winning.
Maybe you guys should care about pre-existing conditions like we do.
Congratulations on finally winning something.
Lisa,
it's because we care about pre-existing conditions.
Okay.
Richard, you made the point. Lisa,
we care about those things too, and the economy.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, remember when everyone was